Relatively new to us. This is Sean Haverstock. Sean is standing down the stage next to me in a couple of minutes. But Sean has actually been on virtually every production that I've shot in the last year, and it's because of his skill set to use the handheld gimbal, which is a stabilization device for cameras, and for flying this RC helicopter. And so I'm going to show you some examples of what this allows you to do. Sean's running full speed with these guys riding these swing bikes, and it's an incredibly stable shot. I mean, this is almost an impossible thing to do. I mean, this is 10 seconds of full speed running with Sean. He has this Movi in his hand as he's running down the bike path. This was one of our first experiments. We went out into the backyard in Lake Tahoe, and you can see there's a little wobble, but we figured that out. This device essentially replaces what you might have heard as a Steadicam unit. This has fewer limitations. You can actually really run with it. You can pass it over a table, for example. This is a shot with a fellow Nikon Ambassador, Joe McNally. We're following him into an environment where he's going to shoot pictures, and Sean is literally holding the gimbal, and I'm controlling it on another set of sticks. So I'm looking at a monitor, and it's stable as we do almost a 360 around Joe. This is cutting edge technology. This is changing the game. You mount a Nikon D800 or DSLR body on these devices, and they allow you to do things. The limitation is only your imagination, which is pretty incredible. Now, and then of course, with each piece of equipment, we all want to up the game. So how do you take the gimbal and attach it to the jib arm? And what does that mean? So now we can actually have this 15-foot jib arm lifting up, and we can be controlling the camera remotely and watching a screen, so we know what's happening in that shot. So here we are in Seattle, or just outside of Seattle, on a floating dock, and we mounted the jib on the, or placed the jib on the dock, mounted the gimbal on the end of the jib, and it creates looks like this. Very cinematic, super high-end. This is $1 million production value 3 years ago, and today it's two guys from Lake Tahoe with a Nikon D800 using their creativity. Now the camera is actually jibbing down while we're actually tilting the head up. I mean, it's very fluid, and this is pretty new for us. We've hardly had the opportunity. We just came up with the idea of mounting our gimbal to the end of the jib arm. So these are probably the two best examples. This is on a jib. The jib is floating across the floor, and we're steering the camera to stay on these two models that Joe is shooting. So as Joe is shooting, we're floating over the top with a 15-foot jib arm. Meanwhile, the camera is actually pointed down and rotating using the controls of the mode. These are impossible shots. As humans, we can't get there unless we're using these devices. So, and it's the combination of ultra lightweight cameras, Nikon D800s, D610s, D4s, combined with these movement devices. Now this is, everyone's read stories about drones recently in the New York Times and all of the controversy, but this device, here's an example. This is the Cinestar by FreeFly with a Movi gimbal mounted to the bottom. RC helicopters are allowing us to put cameras in positions that were never possible, even if you had the $1 million budget. We just can't fly a real A-Star into the same situations that you can fly a remote control camera. So here's a great example. You saw some clips of the mountain biker Rebecca Rush riding on the sandstone ridgeline, and then you can see the helicopter flying behind her. The good news is we're about 12 feet away from Rebecca, maybe 20 feet at times. In a worst case scenario, if this crashes into Rebecca, it's probably going to do more damage to the helicopter than Rebecca. Whereas if you crash an A-Star into Rebecca, you've got a big problem. So here's a couple of clips. And these are kind of in order. This was for the Nikon D4 release. And you can see we're really still figuring out how to use the helicopter. This is, we're flying through a rock slot, which was scary. Here's rock climber Alex Honnold with no rope. And it sounds like a weed whacker when it's flying. So one of our concerns was, look at how close we are, by the way. I mean, that shot, we were 6 feet away probably from Rebecca. This is Argentina. As these guys are climbing the ridgeline, we're standing literally 25 feet away, controlling the helicopter. You know, this is an impossible shot. There's no other way to do this than an RC helicopter with a gimbal. So looking straight down, this is in Lake Tahoe. That's called ramping. We're shooting at 60 frames per second, and then we accelerate the timeline, and then we slow it down when we have the subject. This is, we flew in our, here we go. You can actually see a Nikon D800 in use. This is, we've mounted a little camera next to the D800, and that's what it looks like as it's flying. So, and what you see in that clip is how incredibly stable, even as the helicopter platform is shaking, you know, it's moving forward. The gimbal is actually stabilizing the camera so that it's perfectly level and taking out the vibration. That's the goal if everything's working effectively. So, the one thing I do want to leave you with one video clip. I really wanted tons of camera movement, so we brought Mike and his heli along for the entire trip. We tried to be methodical and safe about each shot, and on day 2 we pushed it a little too far.
Camera made it. The chopper's mostly intact, and it'll live to fly another day.
So I showed that clip only because these are, you know, these are very innovative new devices. And the reason Sean is always with me on these shoots is so that if it crashes, it's his fault, not my fault. But the reality is, be cautious with these devices. Whether you buy the starter helicopter, whether you buy a jib arm, whether you're using the Movi, things go wrong with these devices. But that's also how we make great shots, is we push ourselves to the limit, we use our creativity, and we leverage the tools that are available to us to the absolute limit. So I think what I want to do in our final 10 minutes is actually show you some of this equipment. Can I get a volunteer from the audience to step up on stage? I see you pointing. Would you like to be, you look like a fisherman. We need someone, let's see, any hands? Everyone's jumping out of their skin to be a volunteer here. Let's see, all right, come on up, that's perfect. So what we're going to do is start by actually using the slider. We're just going to go through these devices so that you can actually see what this does in real life and how we operate. What's your name? Raul. Corey, nice to meet you. Step on up here. I'm going to have you stand right on the edge of the stage. And Raul, go ahead and put this vest on. We're going to have you be a mock fisherman just so that, yeah, I will. I think we'll get it on there. That's perfect. Great. That looks authentic. I don't know how much fishing you do, but why don't you just hold this fish like that, kind of one-handed. Perfect. Okay. And then Raul, let's have you actually turn around so that you're facing me. That's perfect. Just like that. Okay, let's actually switch the feed so that we go to this camera. Now, so this is, I was describing a slider or a dolly. That's exactly what this is. This is just a mini slider, pretty small, fits in my backpack. I can literally carry this slider, this jib arm, the tripod alone without help. So we're gonna go to, I'm gonna turn on this D800. I like to shoot at 24 frames per second, full HD at 24 frames per second. And Raul, let me have you take about a, yep, there we go, just like that. So what I want to show you, have a look at the bottom of, you see the flooring and then you see Raul's feet here. So I'm going to pre-focus. That's one other thing about video, you're always pre-focusing. There's no such thing as autofocus when you're shooting video. So we're going to pretend actually that I'm rolling video, and I'm looking to just capture a little detail. You know, here we are, we're telling the story of Raul fishing. This is just pretend he's standing in kind of 6 inches of water and he has his waders on, and I'm poised on a rock here. So this is just an ability to really create kind of a little snapshot of his feet, a little detail. And you can see, it takes me a minute to figure out what the best composition is. Go ahead and bring your other foot right next to it. Yep, there we go. I think that's a little better. Okay, I'm gonna tilt down a little bit. Okay, because what I like is I want to see the foreground moving. So now I'm focused, and so here we go. So we're creating just this kind of cool little vignette, little shot of the slider. And I'll do it a handful of times. If I was recording, I would go back and forth a few times. And that's a really fluid movement relative to what I would do if I was trying to hand hold it. And I really try to just move through shots. Okay, I made a nice little slider shot. I would probably experiment. Let's even set the fish down. You know, maybe he already has one dead fish laying on the floor. And so I would, let's try that real quick. Let's focus on the fish. Okay, and slide across. You see this fish in the foreground. And again, usually I wouldn't be tethered to a monitor, so it's not quite as smooth when I have an HDMI cable sticking out. So you get a sense of what that motion looks like using a slider. So let's go ahead and hold that fish again. So I'm going to switch. I've captured the slider shot. Now I'm going to really quickly pop the camera off of the slider. And let's go into this jib here. Whoops, let me do this backwards. That's one thing about video. There's a lot more cords and a lot more little gadgets that you have to use than still photography, but you get moving picture in the end. So I have a little quick release plate. I'm going to slide this onto the jib arm here. Lock that into place. If I turn that the correct direction. Hey Sean, do you mind just holding this for a second? Cool, okay. And then you want to pre-focus on, Raul, what if I have you right at the edge of the stage there? And we're just going to cheat this. Usually we would tape this HDMI cable so that it's nice and perfect, but I'm just going to loop it right here for a second. So go ahead and focus on Raul's face there. Great, there we go. Now typically I would also put ballast, which is weight, on the back of this jib arm. But for speed's sake, so here we go, he has his prize fish there, and the camera's really just floating through the air. I mean, so we go back down to his feet, and we're just gonna do a reveal shot where we go up to the fish, give us a big corny smile as it gets to your face. There we go, he just caught this huge fish right here at the trade show. So now, and you can do this, so let's say he's standing at the lake right now. I would come off the water, pretend that's not a crowd of people, but we come off the water, right up to the fish. Raul's standing there, he smiles into the camera. Yep, you have a modeling future ahead of you. So that's what our jib arm allows us to do. We're really floating the camera in a situation that otherwise would be impossible. So now we're gonna actually switch, so I've nailed that shot, and I'm kind of checking those shots off the list. And now I'm gonna give this cable, or we're gonna go wirelessly, right? Okay, here we go, let me give you this. So now Sean's gonna fire up the Movi, or the handheld gimbal, and now you're gonna see what we can do with we're gonna be detached from a wire, assuming our transmission works, and we can really float around Raul. So it's gonna allow us to really put the camera anywhere that we want. We can spin around him in a 360, we can actually imitate what we're doing with this slider device or the jib arm with the Movi, or the handheld gimbal. So okay, so we're getting signal. And typically the way that this would work is I would be looking at one monitor, and Sean is looking at another small HD monitor on the gimbal. And so we're talking a lot. I'm actually communicating very clearly with Sean what we're trying to capture. And so I think the first thing we'll try to do is we're just gonna mimic that same slider shot that I did with this device, and we're just gonna show you what it looks like with the gimbal. Sean, just for the heck of it, maybe just point it at Raul and just go ahead and shake the device. And now watch, as Sean is actually moving the device, go ahead and look at how stable that is relative to how much he's moving this device. This is what a gimbal really accomplishes. It allows you, and the signal is because we're using wireless signal, and there's a lot of competition in this room. So if you're seeing it break up, that's what this really is. So the idea is he's pointing this handheld gimbal or Movi at Raul, and then go ahead and do again just to kind of jar it right and left. That's a pretty darn stable shot. Now if we were really doing this for real, we would tune the gimbal so that it's perfect actually, so that there's no shake in the camera. So let's try just for the heck of it. So we're going to do that same left to right motion, and I need to pre-focus on his, okay. And so right now, of course, I'm looking at this monitor instead of another monitor. So I could typically go ahead and try like the right-left motion, Sean, like almost imitate the slider. So you can see that. Now this is more stable than you could accomplish simply using a handheld camera, and that's by adding this stabilization device. And in fact, more flexible than the short stretch of slider that I was using before. So that's one example. Go ahead and do like the jib up. You know, you're just gonna lift it up so that we see. This is the same shot that we did with the jib, but now we're doing it with this handheld gimbal device. It looks like it's not true. Yep, there we go. All right. And again, the flickering on the screen is not representative of the image quality. That's just us trying to send the signal back to the broadcast here. So now, this is what it's really cool for. Let's actually try you do the 360 around the stage. So Raul, you're holding the fish up, you're smiling, and now we're gonna do that spin, very similar to what we showed you in the video clip of Joe McNally. So, all right, you're smiling at the camera, great, and Sean's actually flying around you. So here we go. This is almost like what we would call a steady cam of the past, but we're doing it with a brushless motors and a gimbal. So this really, and let's go back one more time the other way, Sean. Maybe even like walk over the stage, because I think what's so amazing about this is he's not tethered to anything. We're not running tracks. We don't have cables running across the floor. So you can see it's giving us a very stable shot. And right now we just have it set so that it stays focused forward. We could actually be controlling it so that I can pan right, pan left, tilt up, tilt down. So Raul, thank you for your fishing expertise here. The last device that we're just going to show you, and we're not going to fly it because we don't want to decapitate anyone in the room, this is an RC helicopter. This RC standing for remote controlled helicopter. And we have the same gimbal mounted on the bottom of this helicopter for stabilization. So one of the questions we get a lot is how long can you keep that in the air and how much weight can you actually fly? We can put a Nikon D4 on this gimbal and this Cinestar helicopter for 15 minutes and keep it in the air. That's a lot of flight time to be creative and try to explore shots from an aerial perspective. So Sean and I are up here for a bit after this show. If you have any questions about this equipment or camera movement or DSLRs, you're welcome to approach us, and thank you very much for listening.